You're welcome back. This is the Situation Room. The last time we were here with you, there was no by-election in Kumawu, but there was an expectation that there was going to be a by-election. The conversation was going to be, or was around an independent candidate who did so well in 2020. An expectation was that he was going to possibly even cause an upset in the 2023 by-elections of Kumawu, following the demise of Philip Basua. But when it came to it, things didn't go well. Let me go to Kumawu now. The man who was on the ground for us is Hafiz Tijani. Hafiz, I'm sure it was an expectation. Everybody going into Kumawu knew that this independent candidate was really going to be the big guy. Everybody was looking at him. The NDC didn't matter in Kumawu. And then there was a second independent candidate that was dropped in and said, oh, MPP wants to scatter his vote and so on. But when it came to it, things didn't look well. Give us a quick summary of events as you've covered them.
So before the by-election on Tuesday, when the Electoral Commission declared, or maybe Parliament declared the seat vacant and the Electoral Commission announced the result, the NDC and the MPP were all putting their candidates together. But before then, the independent candidate who was still in touch with the constituents from the 2020 general election, going into the communities to still tell them he is interested in the parliamentary seat. He was still in touch with the constituents and trying to do his campaign. But on Tuesday, before Tuesday's election, the by-election, the expectations were that the vote was going to be, or the election was going to be between the MPP's candidates, because that's the NPP stronghold, and the independent candidate. And many were basing their arguments on his performance in the 2020 parliamentary elections. And that didn't go down well. But on Tuesday, a lot happened. The voters voted, the expectations were high, and the message of peace was being trumpeted by many, especially the Peace Council and other stakeholders who looked at the history of by-elections in the country and wanted the Kumawu by-election to be different from the Triponi, the Talinsis, and also the Ayasu West Wuogon by-elections. So the message for peace sank down very well on Tuesday's election, except that there were allegations of vote buying, and we had also low numbers at most of the polling centers on Tuesday. So in brief, that is what happened on Tuesday.
Hafiz, ahead of the election, usually by-elections are used to test the general election as a test case of the general election. I've heard a number of NDC people say that they are going to win that seat to show that MPP is unpopular in office. In fact, the youth organizer of the NDC made that statement to me on Eyewitness News. But when they lost, they said it was vote buying. Indeed, even before the election, they talked about vote buying. So it was critical. So NDC didn't do well the last time, and they didn't do well this time around. It appears it's not surprising, even though they are claiming some victory based on the numbers that came through. They say that they've seen some improvement over what they had in the last election. So let's not really bother about the NDC. Let's focus on Kwekudua, and I mean the senior Kwekudua. What happened? The vote difference in the defeat was huge.
Very huge, Sandra, and that was a surprise of many, including pollsters who predicted that the independent candidate was going to make a mark or win this parliamentary seat. And many were basing their argument in the 2020 general election following his performance. So in 2020, when he left the MPP and stood as an independent candidate, he had a number of followers, many coming from the MPP who had followed him. So going into the 2020 election, he had many people and he had convinced many with his message, and that most of these followers were MPP, and they had gone into the communities to speak to the people. So with the MPP individuals coming to convince people, people knew that what has changed. People who were with the MPP are now following an independent candidate. So why don't we support this independent candidate? But when the results for the parliamentary elections for the 2020 election came, the independent candidate continued to engage with the community. But immediately, Philip Basua passed on. The MPP changed its strategy. They saw that the independent candidate was still a threat to the new candidate they were bringing. Philip Basua was an old folk. He was known in the constituency, but the MPP was bringing a wholly new candidate who was going to be marketed for the first time. So people, the MPP knew that the independent candidate was on the ground already. He was in touch very well with the constituents, and he was going into the communities, doing self-help projects, building some toilet facilities, boreholes, and going into the secondary schools, helping them with some infrastructure from his pockets. So the MPP saw that the independent candidate was still someone who was very popular than the new candidates they were electing. You know, the MPP went into their primaries to select a candidate for the Kumawu by-election with 5 people. So among these 5 people, none of them was going to be popular than the independent candidate with a short period of which the MPP was going to do the campaign. So the MPP had to use a strategy to counter the independent candidate. So the independent candidate, one, Chairman Wuntumi, mounted any political platform. Chairman Wuntumi is called Bernard Entry Bosiakon. He is the Ashanti Regional Chairman of the MPP. Mounted any political platform, lambasted this the independent candidate, Kokudia. And the focus was on the independent candidate, trying to make him unpopular in the constituency as against the elected parliamentary candidate for the party.
And there's even, in fact, the independent candidate,
another strategy.
Kwekudia,
the independent.
Kwekudia said to me that Chairman Wuntumi was the one who brought the other Kwekudia to come and contest him. That's what he said to me on Eyewitness News. But yes, the other Kwekudia, he didn't even show in percentage terms on election day. It means that he was not. Well, he was not a threat after all.
Well, on Tuesday. Yes, exactly. Well, on Tuesday, even when we went to some of the polling stations, he didn't even have agents to represent him. You didn't find agents of him represent him, but you had the first Kokudia having most of or in all of the polling stations, he had agents who were there to represent him. So this meant he was very serious, but the other Kokudia, many thought he was going to be a threat to the first independent candidate, coming in with the same name, the same logo, the same dress code. Many thought he was going to be a threat. But the MPP later realized that the second Kokudia was not going to be a threat to the first Kokudia. So the government machinery, the president, the vice president, ministers, presidential staffers, all concentrated on Kumawu, and they did what they could to retain the seat.
Be there for me for a bit. Let me bring in Bernard. Bernard.
No, I wanted to ask him a question before this. So, Hafiz, if you can hear me, what about the NDC candidate? Was he a new face? Was he a repeated candidate? And his performance seems to have been better than in the 2020 election. Tell us a bit more about the Amankwa guy.
Yes, Kwesi Amankwa is well known in the constituency. He also hails from Bodumase. So interestingly, Bernard, the MPP candidates, the first independent candidate, the NDC's candidate, the second independent candidate, they all come from the same community. That is the Bodumase area. So this NDC candidate is well known in the area, and he is someone who has also lived in the area for a very long time, and he's known in the area. So many are not surprised about the kind of votes he got. And the NDC also has their stronghold areas or communities within the Kumawu constituency. So they also capitalize on these areas to get more votes than concentrating in areas they knew was MPP stronghold. So that made the magic for the NDC's candidate.
I see. Ben, I think we
yeah.
we
So
can,
I wanted
yeah.
to ask Hafiz a few questions based on the numbers. So Hafiz, if you can stay. So yes, this is the first question we have is the turnout. So 2020, 78% turnout, which is similar to the national picture. By election, 57%. Now that's a drop. We know that by-elections don't have the same level of turnout as national elections. But what's your comment about the dip in the turnout, particularly when you say everybody was there, Mahama was there, Nanado was there, you know, the whole political machinery of the big parties was there, and yet they got less than 60% turnout. What can you say on the ground in relation to why the turnout dipped so much?
So somewhere in April 2022, we were in the area to cover a demonstration by residents in the area who were not so happy about the poor nature of the road. Some of the comments you heard from the residents was that it's a dominant MPP area and the people have been voting for the MPP. And the MPP has not done much in terms of infrastructure, talk of the roads, and social amenities within the communities, the places of convenience are very dire issues or very key issues people want the government to solve. So these are some of the issues you are getting from the people before even the demise of the sitting MP and the announcement of the by-election and the by-election itself. People were peeved. They were not happy about the government. They were sending some signals to the government that this is an MPP seat. You have abandoned us in terms of road. The road was a major problem because people were being attacked. Robbers had taken advantage of the poor nature of the road to attack market women who were using that stretch to Kumasi and Drobonso. So the road was a factor. So even before the election, the by-election, when the road was being constructed, people passed comments that they were convinced that if the by-election or the election was over, the government was going to abandon the road. So that set in the voter apathy we saw on Tuesday.
The other issue for the MPP, apart from the reduction in voters, if you do a net voter gain between 2020 and then 2023 by-election, they only gained 304 votes from their previous. So with all the campaigning, this gentleman, even though he got 70% of valid votes cast, if you actually look at the number of votes he got, it is only 304 votes more than Philip Baswa. But Kwesi Amankwa got almost 1,300 votes more. So when you read former President Mohammed's Facebook post, he basically was saying it's victory for them because they are looking at a reduction in the number of voters and then they're looking at gaining votes. So he basically said their candidate got over 50% more than he got in the previous election. I don't know whether he spoke to Kwesi Amankwa again after the election, whether he felt happy about the numbers he got. What are your thoughts around this and what this potentially means for 2024? Again, this constituency has a lot of independent history, independent parliamentarian history. So for Kwekudia, the first to lose almost 10,000 votes, we heard some people say that he was cheated and that his votes went to the MPP. So if NDC is happy, even though they lost, is there something we are missing? Or on the ground, can you understand why Mahama will be saying this is good for them?
Well, I have not had any official interview with the NDC's candidate, but I have spoken to some NDC executives who have said that the MPP has lost it in Kumawu, which is their stronghold, looking at some of the problems I've just mentioned, because the NDC before then had gone into the constituency to do its own survey to find out the concerns the people were raising, and they capitalized on that. But when the road or the roads were being rehabilitated, the NDC also capitalized on that and telling the people that it's because your MP is demised or is passed on. That's why the party you have voted for since is now coming to attend to you. And most of the inhabitants bought into what was being sent to them, because they saw that, though the road minister said it was a coincidence, but the message from the NDC that the passing of the MP resulted in the construction of the road sank into the minds of the inhabitants of Kumawu, who says that, so why is it that the government waited until now before constructing our road? We have spoken to some other people in the constituency prior to the by-election, and they have also said that if there's an election today, they will vote for the NDC's candidates or an independent candidate at the parliamentary and vote for President Akufo-Addo or the flag bearer of the MPP in the presidential. So the apathy has set in not from today, but the residents just wanted to show it in terms of this election, though they had complained and they thought that no one had listened to them. And the issue about the independent candidate. So in 2008, we had Dominic Otin. He came out as an independent candidate, though he had nothing to do with the MPP. He just came out as an independent candidate and contested in the parliamentary election. And he polled 7,120 votes. That translated into 26.38%. So, and in 2012, this same candidate came as an independent candidate, and the votes dropped. So the analysis here will be that the MPP would look at the performance of an independent candidate in a previous election and do its homework very well in the subsequent election to improve its votes and also maybe suppress the vote of the independent candidate. So in 2012, this same independent candidate polled 3,991 votes, which translated into 14%, 14.59%. So the difference, 26% and 14%, that is what we are seeing now for Kokudia, the first Kokudia in the 2020 election and in this by-election.
Thank you, Hafiz. Stay on. I just wanted to prove that you were right in what you just said by showing a couple of things. So this is the net gain, NDC 1,008, MPP 300, net loss 9,000. In terms of percentages, MPP gains 2%, NDC gains 11%. This is parliamentary. Independent loses close to 80%. But this is why I think what you're saying is interesting. This one. So, presidential election, Akufo-Addo gets 23,000 votes. If you put together the independent and the MPP candidate together, it's 26,000, right? So, it tells you that skirt and blouse is in this constituency, and you're right, 3,155 of the president. So it's a very dicey constituency. And I will let this sink in. When we come back, I will show you some very interesting history about the constituency. Sanda and Hafiz, this constituency is very independent candidate prone, which means that it's very skirt and blouse prone. Don't forget that the current second Deputy Speaker of Parliament is an independent candidate. Mm-hmm. Now, the first Deputy Speaker of Parliament used to be an independent candidate as well. So Joe Wise has gone independent before.
Yeah.
So we'll try and understand what's happening in Ashanti. If you look at Ashanti and Volta, strongholds of parties sometimes can afford to have independent candidates who will even win, and yet the people will vote for the president of the party, because you have Victor Behu.
Yeah.
He I think it was 2004 or so. He went independent. He won. Even though the party had a different candidate. I think it was Clenso at the time. So maybe when we come back, Hafiz, you can talk to us a bit about Ashanti and the way independent candidates work whether when somebody feels aggrieved in the primaries. And again, this is important because the MPP have decided to wait till February to do their primaries. And I'm sure Ashanti primaries would be very, very serious. So if you can put your analysis on and tell us where you see potential trouble. And then, of course, we'll also show you the historical trend of the constituency, which is very interesting in terms of how the two parties are doing. All of this coming up when we come back to the Citiuation room, which is analyzing the Kumawu by-election